Hello there. Welcome in to a Monday edition of the show, hour 3. So if you're just tuning in now, just know that we have been going for a while. Feel free to join us right at 3. But no matter how much time you dedicate to this show on a daily basis, I do appreciate it, whether you're listening on air, online, or through the Extra Sports 1300 app, or perhaps you are watching on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or YouTube at XTRA Sports 1300. If you would like to take your participation to the next level and interact with the show, maybe troll a little bit like Tom's trying to do with the Denver Broncos, don't worry, I'll get to your text, Tom. You could send in your thoughts at 719-247-1313 by calling or texting in. Right now, let's get to the 3 stories that are driving the show that all have to do with the performance you saw from the Broncos on Saturday. All right, let's start with quarterback controversy in Denver for story number 1. How's that sound?
10 plays already over 10 yards. Now Stidham wants the end zone. Back shoulder and is caught. Troy Franklin. It's another dime for Jared Stidham. And he finds Franklin again for a beautiful touchdown.
9 News on the call there. Jared Stidham, very good again as the Denver Broncos get a lopsided win in preseason week 2 against the Arizona Cardinals. Stiddy, 6 of 9 for $149 and that touchdown. And the questions come back up again. Should the Broncos sell high on Jared Stidham to a quarterback-needy team? And to that, I say no. The Broncos took out an expensive insurance policy on the quarterback position, on their most valuable possession, right? Which a quarterback is for any team. They brought in Stidham. They paid him more than your normal NFL backup makes because Sean Payton wanted to essentially be able to do the same thing he did with Teddy Bridgewater all those years ago. I lose my number 1 QB. It's okay. For a short spell of time, I got this guy. I trust him. He knows my offense. He can operate it, and we can get by. Why would you sell that insurance policy for pennies on the dollar? Because I could argue that Jared Stidham is more valuable to the Denver Broncos right now in a season where they are talking about the Super Bowl than a 3rd or 4th round pick in next year's NFL draft. This conversation makes no sense to me whatsoever. If Bo Nix were to pull a hammy, tear a rotator cuff, do something, and you want to turn to Sam Ehlinger? Now, maybe the rotator cuff injury is a little bit more dramatic because that would mean that Bo Nix would be out for the season. But let's say he has some injury that would keep him out a month. Broncos are trying to win a division here. They're trying to compete for a Super Bowl. And Bo Nix is going to be out 3 weeks and you're going to turn to Sam Ehlinger? You don't cash in your insurance policy. And that's what Jared Stidham is. He's not the best quarterback on the Broncos roster. He can't lead them to the playoffs over a 17-game season. But you have the peace of mind, because that's what insurance is, the peace of mind to know that if Bo Nix were dinged up and he had to get by for a few weeks, you got a guy more than capable of doing that. And he showed it for back-to-back weeks. You don't sell that. You hang on to it. There's a reason why Sean Payton told George Payton to pay Jarrett Stidham as much as he's making. And we saw him do this in New Orleans. Capable plus backup is one of the things Sean Payton really wants on his roster. And he has one in Jarrett Stidham. And he was good. And according to Sean Payton, all of his running backs were good. Here's story number 2.
All of them, I thought, played well, which I don't know if it clears up our but I thought we got into the defense. We got downhill into the defense a number of times. RJ's touchdown. I thought for the most part, and I thought as the game wore on, our down and distances, our third downs were much more favorable than theirs.
Dilemma, I think, is the word that Sean Payton was looking for there at the beginning of that clip. No J.K. Dobbins. Here are the final tallies on the running backs. R.J. Harvey, 3 carries, 18 yards, and touchdown. Tyler Bidet, 4 carries for 14 yards. Blake Watson, 10 carries for 34 yards. Audric Estime, 9 carries for 20 yards. And the standout was Jaleel McLaughlin, 3 carries, 48 yards, 35 of them on one scamper. I do think Sean Payton is right. I think all of the running backs that played had at least a moment. Who had the most moments? That's Jaleel McLaughlin. And that has to mean something, right? As this comes down to Watson, Bidet, McLaughlin, and Estime for 2 spots, the fact that we were all trying to push Blake Watson on the Denver Broncos and push out Jaleel McLaughlin, for him to respond the way he did with some light work of 3 carries for 48 yards, that should weigh heavily here. And I wasn't to the point where I thought Blake Watson should take Jaleel McLaughlin's spot. I just thought it was more of a question after the first preseason game. But McLaughlin answered in resounding fashion. So I think going into preseason game number 3, I think it's down to one guy for 3 spots. Watson, Bidet, Estime. And I think that the guy that is definitely out is Audric Estime. We didn't see him till the second half. He averaged another paltry 2.2 yards a carry. And again, what is he bringing to the table that Sean Payton needs? A battering ram? The Broncos roster has now 3 fullbacks on it. Have one of them run it for 2.2 yards a carry. I just think times have changed. More of an emphasis on the outside run game. You draft R.J. Harvey, you sign J.K. Dobbins. It's a very different world for the Broncos running backs than it was at the end of last season. And at the end of last season, it is reasonable to think that Audric Estime was going to get every opportunity to be a guy for Sean Payton. And then a bunch of stuff happened, and now he's not. So I think he's out, and I would go with Bidet. Watson brings a lot of the same things to the table that Jaleel McLaughlin does. And if you can bring in Bidet on passing downs to block rather than putting J.K. Dobbins out there for another play where he could get hurt, I think you do that. But the 3 for 1 spot will battle it out on Saturday in New Orleans. But to me, if the 53 was due tomorrow instead of next Tuesday, it would be Dobbins, Harvey, McLaughlin, and Bidet. And I'm sure Sean Payton will be asked about it a lot between now and Saturday. You heard from him earlier on in that highlight of the touchdown, but let's go a little bit more in depth on the young Oregon Duck for the subject of story number 3.
It's happening, and I'm excited. You know, I think we just got to be smart because he's playing 2 spots. But he's had a really good camp. He's confident, you know, and I've said this a bunch of times. It has to happen on the field, and you guys that have covered this team or any other team, like you see it in the preseason every year. Some players that begin to make some plays, and it carries over. And so that's why these games are important.
That was Sean Payne, obviously, on Troy Franklin, who had 4 catches for 67 yards, also threw a pretty good block on that long pass play to Evan Ingram early in the game. Outside of the running back competition, the number one thing that I went into that game Saturday looking for is just who looks like they don't belong in a game like this. A game that was played mostly by backups and was more about the guys on the bubble than the guys who are definitely contributors to the upcoming season. I thought there were 4 guys that by definition should be in that game, but they didn't look like they belonged. Jared Stidham was one of them. Jonah Ellis was another. Troy Franklin was a third. And I will also add Pat Bryant to the mix. That dude is doing exactly what he was expected to do coming out of Illinois. He's catching the football. But you have Troy Franklin making plays and looking like they were a mismatch for their fellow backups. So what does this ultimately mean? When the regular season rolls around, maybe they get more opportunities than was thought that they would get coming into the preseason. Again, there are a lot of other people who need to get the football. Okay, so don't need to get too carried away with Pat Bryant and Troy Franklin, but the credit I will give them that they rightly deserve is they look like they were a notch above the competition they were playing. So you go beyond Sutton and Mims, maybe you see some Troy Franklin. And I mentioned this earlier. Like Sutton stands apart because of his resume on the Denver Broncos and how long he's been there. Really, outside of the red zone, is Cortland Sutton a must? Is he a must play before you get to the red zone? Now, there's still a lot of guys to choose from there, and I think Cortland Sutton's going to be on the field the vast majority of snaps. But it's Troy Franklin and maybe to a lesser extent Pat Bryant that have put themselves in the mix that maybe Sean Payton gives them some looks that maybe even he wasn't expecting to give them once the season rolls around. We know Sean Payton's, how he teases people with the rookies. Marvin Mims, he did this. So I'd certainly put Franklin above Pat Bryant, but they both, again, if Sean Payton's saying that these games matter, Troy Franklin and Pat Bryant are showing, hey, we deserve some more consideration given how good we have been in the preseason. Take your thoughts on the 3 stories that are driving the show, 719-247-1313. You add it all up, and what do you get? This Broncos team, pretty deep. But does that mean that they are the best at what they do in terms of drafting players? I say maybe going a little bit too far. That's next here on Extra Sports 1300. Your thoughts on this Monday? Welcome at 719-247-1313. Aaron called in during the break and said he thought we would see a lot more of Jaleel McLaughlin this week, or I should speak in the future tense, that we will see more of Jaleel McLaughlin on Saturday against the New Orleans Saints. And I could see it, even though I know Sean Payton doesn't look at it this way. I think I'm looking at it like Watson versus McLaughlin. And take your swings. Show off that home run speed, that big playability, and whoever does it more, you get on the roster. Again, Sean Payton will take a more holistic approach and think of how they looked in practice, in film study, in the joint practices. But again, I give a lot of credit to Jaleel McLaughlin because I know he heard everything that was being said. And the prevailing belief was that Jaleel McLaughlin might be on the outside looking in. And he had limited touches and was more productive than any other running back on the Broncos roster. So however this ends, credit to Jaleel McLaughlin for answering the bell on Saturday because he was a guy that we thought needed to. This coming in from Tom. I know what you're doing, Tom, but I'll read it and I'll respond to it. So you're backtracking on the Broncos not making the playoffs already. Just to catch those of you up who may be just tuning in, I mentioned Trey Hendrickson, that the Bengals are listening to offers. And what I said was you have Rashawn Slater getting hurt for the Chargers. Now you have the Bengals maybe trading Trey Hendrickson. By the time we get to the season opener, the Broncos might be the last man standing for that 7th wild card spot. I have this team winning 9 games. Okay, so this idea that I'm burying the Denver Broncos is nonsense. I don't have them as a playoff team. But if one of the teams in front of them is losing their left tackle, and one of the teams in front of them might be voluntarily trading one of the best pass rushers in football the last couple of years, then they're weakening themselves. Well, the Chargers aren't doing it on purpose. As of today, even with disgruntled Trey Hendrickson, but still on the Cincinnati Bengals, and the Chargers probably moving Joe Alt to left tackle, I still have both of those teams being better than the Broncos. So no, I am not backtracking. I didn't have them that far out of the playoffs to begin with. It was more of a tongue-in-cheek comment that all these teams that I have in front of the Denver Broncos are going to sabotage themselves. And the Broncos are going to be in line for that 7th wild card, 7th playoff seed. Not backtracking. But this Cincinnati thing, they got to be better than they were last year defensively. They have to be. That's what I'm banking on. If they don't have Trey Hendrickson, I don't know how they can be. This feels like a tactic. It feels like as much of a tactic just from the team side as Terry McLaurin and Micah Parsons asking for trades on the player side. This feels like posturing. This feels like the Bengals trying to send a message to Trey Hendrickson that you are not indispensable. The problem here is that he kind of is. So I don't know how well this is going to work. But something to keep your eye on, certainly, as we get closer to the season. Just, couple, 2-3 weeks away? It's coming up. What has been abundantly clear throughout these first two preseason games. And it's important, right, to put these games in its proper context. Winning in the preseason, losing in the preseason historically has very little bearing on the success of a team during the regular season. But that's not to say that we can't learn things about certain teams throughout the preseason. Like, Broncos have depth. Broncos have players that are deserving of seeing the field. And I think the way to properly contextualize what this means is that George Paton has done a very good job, despite not having premium draft capital, of accumulating depth. The difference between the Broncos, because I would say if you were ranking NFL teams on their drafting ability, the Broncos would not be one of the top 5 drafting teams in the NFL right now. And I'll tell you why. Because part of what you look at in terms of a team hitting on their draft picks is getting elite talent. The Broncos right now have 2 players on their roster that appear to be elite. One is very elite. He is Pat Surtain. Benito is the other one that you think is on the verge of being elite. Okay, and George Paton deserves credit for drafting both of them. But compare it to like the Detroit Lions. The Lions drafted Aiden Hutchinson, Penny Sewell, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jahmyr Gibbs. And these are guys that are some of the best at their positions in all of the NFL. So the reason why the Broncos wouldn't rank probably in my top 5 came to best drafting teams is actually not their fault. It is their fault, but it's a reasonable conclusion to come to, because they just haven't had the premium draft capital to give them an opportunity to hit home runs with their top draft. They haven't been able to draft a Jamar Chase. They haven't been able to draft an Aiden Hutchinson. And that's why I stopped short of saying it's their fault, because it is their fault. They gave up so much of their premium draft capital to bring in Russell Wilson, and then they used more of it to bring in Sean Payton to fix Russell Wilson, which did not work. So the Denver Broncos and George Paton have done a remarkable job of finding so many NFL caliber players despite not having the draft capital to help them do that. They haven't had first round picks routinely. They haven't had second round picks over the last few years, right? So George Paton has done a really good job. But how many of these players, whether it be Troy Franklin or I know Devon Vele is different, but just some of these younger guys, Pat Bryant, et cetera, how many of these guys are Pro Bowlers? Can you legitimately see them becoming Pro Bowlers? How many of these guys would be number 1 or 2 receivers on other NFL teams? That's part of what goes into how good a team is at drafting. Are you getting Pro Bowl caliber players? Are you getting all pros? Are you getting stars? The Broncos aren't accumulating stars with their draft picks, but what they are getting is depth. Exactly what's been on showcase the last 2 weeks. They have a lot of guys. Their decisions with the 53-man roster are very difficult, and it is a credit to them. But there are two of their draft picks, really one, right? Really one, again, because you think Nick Bonito is going to become an elite pass rusher. 1 year of elite production does not make you elite. Even if you include Nick Bonito, that's two. There are teams with 4 or 5 guys that they have drafted in just the last few years. I mean, San Francisco, Baltimore, Detroit, Kansas City's one. The Chargers have hit big on some of their draft picks in the last 5 years. Now, what you look to is, okay, there's Bo Nix. You just take Jahdae Barron, who I think has a chance to be. A lot of this is now the Broncos are finally getting their premium draft capital back, and maybe they'll be able to have more of those kind of guys that are some of the best at what they do. Right now, we don't know. Right now, all we know for sure is that George Paton has drafted one elite player in his tenure as Broncos general manager, and that's Pat Surtain. There are some that look like they may be on that trajectory, but he only has one. But you know the reason why. It's not because he's whiffed on his top draft picks. It's that his top draft picks haven't come till the second or in most cases the third round. He's done a terrific job. But when you give up your premium draft capital, when the elite talent in each draft is available, what you get if you hit is what the Broncos have now. Depth. Not stars, but depth. And if an injury were to happen to one of their players, you feel decent and go back to Jarrett Stidham or Jonah Ellis. You feel pretty good about who's there backing up the guy at their position. But in the NFL, it more so comes down to your top line talent, not your third, fourth, fifth linebackers. But George Paton has to be credited. I mean, you could certainly say it's his fault that he hasn't had the draft capital that he should, but he's made the most of what he's had. 100%. And he deserves to be commended for that. And you're seeing it the last couple of weeks. 719-24-7, 1313. Take a break, come back. Anything I miss? I do want to talk about Ashton Genty in his encore performance for the Las Vegas Raiders. That and other NFL news and notes coming up next. We got preseason football tonight, if you're interested. Commanders are in action. I would like the real thing to get here. I'm about ready. I don't know. I know in places like Cleveland and in Indianapolis, this third preseason game might be treasured. I think we're about done here with the Broncos preseason. I think we can just move on. But it's coming a week late, but we will get the Bo Nix redemption game this weekend. Or the redemption game for the entire starting Broncos unit, given how they did not necessarily impress against the San Francisco 49ers. Meanwhile, they'll be going up against a team that has to figure out who their quarterback is. And I saw the stats for Tyler Shuck and Spencer Rattler. They're almost identical. I don't know what Kellen Moore does. I guess you start Tyler Shuck. And it's like the Browns thing. And when I was talking about them earlier, like you just got to see it. Because if you're going to be in a position, not that I think Tyler Shuck, I would take both of the Browns rookie quarterbacks over Tyler Shuck. But clearly the Saints like him to some degree. So play him. See what you have in him. And then inevitably try to get Manning or Nussmeier. Either one would be a great story. Arch with his grandfather playing for the Saints and Nussmeier being at LSU. Or ruin the homecoming for Drew Aller and take him instead of letting the Browns draft him. And the player that was mentioned earlier is by Jake Burns. It was this South Carolina's quarterback that some people are really high on. Lenoris Sellers. So maybe another quarterback to throw into this mix. Not all of them will be highly thought of when April rolls around. But if you're the Saints, if you're the Browns, at some point you got to see what you have on your roster. You like these rookies to some extent. See what you have. I understand the Browns today naming Joe Flacco their starting quarterback. You got to do that. As Jake pointed out earlier, the Browns' opening schedule is just a murderer's row. And Shador or Dylan Gabriel, neither one are prepared to handle it. Saints' schedule not quite as daunting, so I think the Saints can just start Tyler Shuck and see where it goes. But that quarterback competition, if there is indeed one in New Orleans, you'll get to see Saturday with the Denver Broncos first team, which may not be very good for this Saints quarterback competition to go up against the Broncos first team defense, especially a Broncos first team defense that failed to impress the last time out. One other preseason note that I wanted to get to from the weekend. Ashton Jeanty had his, I use the word encore. Doesn't that have to have a positive connotation? Like the first performance has to be good for it to be an encore? Or does it just have to be the same? It was better from Ashton Jeanty. Much better. And I did say after the limited reps that Jeanty got in that first preseason game, that part of Genty's deal here is he can break tackles. Didn't break tackles in his preseason debut. So it appears what Ashton Jeanty decided, because these players, despite what they'll tell you, hear everything. Ashton Jeanty was like Bobby Boucher. I remember when Bobby Boucher handed the ball to the guy just so he could drop kick him. That's how Ashton Jeanty felt against the 49ers. It looked like because he didn't break any tackles in the first preseason game, he was like, I'm going to break tackles, and I will seek tackles so that I can break them. So if that was the message Ashton Jeanty was trying to send, message received. He broke tackles against the 49ers backups, but he broke tackles. Here's the thing, though. If that's really how Ashton Jeanty is going to run the football, I put his over-under week 3, maybe week 4 at when we have the first Ashton Jeanty injury. There is a balance here. Yes, part of Ashton Jeanty's scouting report is that he was able to break tackles. It didn't matter how good the line was in front of him at Boise State because he could break tackles. Okay, and he's going to be expected to do that with the Raiders. First preseason game didn't show that. Saturday, he did. But you also have to be smart and realize that if you don't have to break a tackle, then don't. Stop intentionally running into defensive players. Run away from them. Run around them. That's better. The line is, look, if somebody wraps you up, then you got to try and be able to break free. Not, hey, you have an open running lane to your left, but you're going to run to your right just so you could truck the 4th string backup linebacker for the 49ers. Because, yeah, he's probably not going to tackle you, but you could get hurt. And if Ashton Jeanty gets banged up, the Raiders are going to be the biggest laughingstock in the NFL. Because everyone was saying, what about Ashton Jeanty? Not anything against Jeanty necessarily. You don't draft a running back that high because of their propensity to get hurt. And if Ashton Jeanty, taken as high as the Vegas Raiders took him, gets hurt within the first month of the season because he wants to be this battering ram, that will be bad. So, yes, Ashton Jeanty showed that he could break tackles from pseudo NFL players. I think it would be better for him to just run away from them if at all possible. If Ashton Jeanty figures that out, or if Chip Kelly or Pete Carroll get to him and say, hey, we know you could break tackles. Break them if necessary. Don't seek them out. I think the Raiders are going to steal some wins. I think the entire identity of this Raiders team is don't suck. That's all it is. They are not fooling themselves and thinking that they are a playoff team. They are not fooling themselves into thinking that they are on the verge of being a contender. All they want to do is just not be awful. And I think they have the personnel with Geno Smith, with Ashton Jeanty, with Max Crosby, with Pete Carroll coaching them. I think they have the ability to not suck. I don't think that the Raiders are going to suck this year. And you know who will come at the expense of? The Chargers, the Broncos, and the Chiefs. I would not be surprised if the Raiders split with all three divisional opponents. Now, there's a bigger picture here in which how can the Raiders reasonably expect to ever be contenders if their whole idea is just we're not going to be terrible? Again, that whole idea of at some point you got to think about your ceiling. Right? And Geno Smith is not going to give you a very high ceiling. But they are worried about their floor. So for this year, it'll probably make a lot of people around Vegas feel warm and fuzzy because the Raiders are not going to be a terrible football team this year. They're not going to be good. They're the fourth best team in the AFC West, don't get me wrong, but I think the win total is going to go up from what it was a year ago. And that's what Pete Carroll and Tom Brady and everybody else is going to parade around. Look at our win improvement. And our answer to that inevitably, well, where did that get you? Where did your 8 wins get you? 4th place in the division? Sweet. Hang the banner. But the Raiders are going to take some wins away from people. Don't know what good it does them to do that in terms of a long-term future, but when you hire Pete Carroll, you're not exactly preoccupied with where you'll be 5 years from now, are you? Stop intentionally running into people, Ashton Genty. That's my advice. My advice for every running back, by the way. Don't intentionally run into people. If you can run away from them or around them, do that. That doesn't make you weak. Saquon Barkley jumps over guys. Nobody thinks Saquon Barkley is less of a running back because he didn't try to truck over the Jacksonville player. If you can break tackles, great. But if you don't have to be in a tackle to break, that is, I think, a better outcome, given the volatility of health at that position. But Ashton Genty much better with preseason take 2. Before I go, let's have a frank and honest conversation, shall we? Be honest. You feeling tired? Maybe you don't have drive, you don't have that focus or that motivation that you typically have. That may not be stress. It may not just be because you're older. It may be something that you have very little control over, and that's low T. And you know that all of that stuff I just mentioned can affect your entire life, your relationships. People don't want to be around you as much. Who wants that? You're a delightful human being. You shouldn't let something make you less delightful to be around. Visit the experts at Low T Center. Take their testosterone test. It's free. 15 minutes, you're going to get your results. And if it is low testosterone, just know you're in the right place to get it treated. They have a variety of options for treatment, including at-home treatment. So not constant runs to the doctor's office. And if you refer a friend and you both start doing treatment, you're going to get a $250 credit. Even better. So don't wait. Take the first step. Visit fixmylowt.com. That's fixmylowt.com. And take back your life with the local pros who know how to help. And that's Low T Center. It has been my distinct and honor pleasure My distinct and honor pleasure? My distinct honor and pleasure to serve you this afternoon. Appreciate your interaction. Enjoy your evening. We'll come back, do it all again tomorrow at 3 here on Extra Sports 1300.